Welcome everybody to the first Bittensor Twitter Spaces. Today we're going to have a brief discussion and try to answer as many of the Slido questions from the community as possible. With that getting started, Const, how are you doing?
Very well, very well. Can you can hear me well? You can hear me very well, according to Allah.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm doing fine. Really excited for this talk. You know, there's a lot of questions on our Slido. We tried to synthesize them instead of answering every single one of them, in order. So let's try to get to it.
Okay. So Allah, Const, we're a few months into Q1. The foundation has released an official wallet and has won the parachain auction that allows Bittensor to plug into the Polkadot ecosystem. I know the team has been working tirelessly to test and debug the parachain over the past several weeks before migration. But what stage is the Finny chain upgrade in? And when can we expect a merger into Kusama or Polkadot? And what else is being brought with the Finny upgrade?
Yeah, a lot of people are really excited about this, and we are too. Getting into the Polkadot ecosystem means that we unleash ourselves. Tau becomes much more decentralized. It becomes accessible on markets in a trustless manner. So we don't just have wrapped tokens on contracts. We actually have Tau that's moving across chain. So people are really excited about this. We are too. And there's a lot that goes into that upgrade. There's a lot of things that can go wrong on a parachain. We've been spending a lot of the time just ensuring that absolutely nothing breaks when it comes to launching the next chain, and that this is smooth process, a smooth integration into the new ecosystem. In order to do that properly, we launched the initial Finny Alpha soft launch in January. People got used to people that were real bullish on this new chain got access to that through our Python code. And where we're going to go next is we're going to launch a Kusama chain. Now, unlike our other test network, this will be a test network for the eventual Finny launch, is that we want this to be an incentivized test network, because in order for us to really evaluate how this network runs in a test environment, we do need some incentivization to ensure people actually run miners and that those miners are acting in a competitive, incentivized way. So the way that we're going to go approach that is we're launching this Kusama incentivized test network. Now, what that means is we're not replacing Tau. In no way is this ever going to be worth more than Tau. It's just that it will be integrated in the Kusama network as a canary network, similar to the way that Polkadot has a Kusama chain, and there's a token associated with that, which has a much smaller market cap. Our goal is to launch this by the end of this month, and we're pretty confident that we'll hit that benchmark and actually hit that date and have a Kusama network available for people. One of the reasons that we're doing this on Kusama is so that developers like Creative Builds, who's one of our community members, can have access to this substrate chain to build palettes, to do cross-chain logic on our code base, and we can do that in a more a less important ecosystem, you could say. We can take bigger risks with the Kusama chain, and we intend to open that up a lot more to our developer community. So that's what's going on with the chain in the next little while. Mac, the question was about the full year, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep, full year.
Yeah. So after the Kusama launch at the end of this month, the moment that people are really excited about, obviously, is launching Finny live into Polkadot, and that's going to happen mid-March. We want to hold firm to Q1, so definitely before the end of March, there'll be that chain, and people will have access to Tau within inside the Polkadot ecosystem. So that's really exciting, and obviously that's been our major push for Q1. Getting this launched onto DEXs is a gargantuan task, and it's also a really difficult one, and it's one that we have to be very careful about moving forward on. So that's why things have taken some time. At the same time that we're pushing the blockchain side of this project, there's been a whole ocean of machine learning work that's going underneath, that's been occurring in the background of OpenTensor. Primarily, it's around updates to the validators and preparing ourselves for multi-sub networks on Finny. with the ability to have multiple subnetworks on Finney, obviously it allows us to investigate different types of validation techniques and incentivize different types of machine learning. So primarily, like the most important and the first change that's going to come out is a change to the validation method on Nakamoto. We're going to fork Nakamoto. And what I mean by Nakamoto is the 4096 network that we're currently dealing with. We're basically going to fork that into another network and change the validation process so that it works around embedding-based machine learning. This is a really big push because it's taking us back to the roots of the project where we originally built Bittensor to work at the pure information theoretic level, at the embedding level. And we think that the situation of the project, inside of the machine learning and artificial intelligence industry a lot better than purely doing sequence generations. For instance, if you look at a project like LangChain, if you look like a company like Cohere, if you look at a company like OpenAI, one of the fundamental things that all of these technologies and companies are built on is embedding-based machine learning. And we want to get back to that as a company, and we want to do that with a new type of validator. So that means that validators are going to change away from producing sequences from token sequences back to embeddings. One of the reasons we moved away from embeddings in the last year was because we wanted to increase the explainability of what Bittensor was doing. We wanted to get a grasp on, okay, if somebody's running a faster computer, if somebody's running a larger model, are they going to perform better in Bittensor? And the answer was yes. We learned this lesson. We became much more confident in the way that we were validating. We got a lot better at validating with more clear human interpretable information. But now, moving back to embeddings, things are going to change. It's gonna be a requirement for miners to really get familiar with machine learning and be able to do machine learning optimization inside of Bittensor. So they're going to have to be able to pick up gradients that are passed from the validators and use that to adapt their models. So you're not going to be able to just look at the loss anymore because that's not something that we'll be able to measure at the miner side, given that we're working in this other dimension, which is with embeddings. So that's one of the huge updates, and I think it's important that people understand about it because they understand that we're moving this direction because it will change the nature of the mining that people are doing in the next few months. So this is like the beginning of Q2. We're really excited about this change. It's coming directly from our Cortex team. Our Cortex team is our applied machine learning team that's doing machine learning research on top of Bittensor, and they're asking for embeddings. So we're adapting the validators to give the ML team what they need in order to perform better inside the system. And this is kind of like, it speaks to the nature of Bittensor, like how we are this multiple level company where there's the miners, the validators, and then there's the applied research team that are in, we're trying to find alignment between those three levels in the company. So that's really exciting. That's one of the things on the roadmap. Now, going forward into the year, when we get to the chatbot Mac, I can talk a little bit about what's going on there. But before that point, we also have plans to release an audio network. This is so that we can begin to do things like generating music on Bittensor, and also an image network. So working with image embeddings so that we can build images. I think this year, if we could say what is the overarching goal for this year. Last year it was about getting the market running for Bittensor. This year it's all going to be about expanding the machine learning capabilities of Bittensor and expanding what we can do with different modalities. So hopefully that answers your question, Mac, and maybe there's some comments in the chat too that we can look to.
Yeah. So to touch back on the new validator, for those of you who don't know, the consensus and validation mechanism is what makes Bittensor what it is. It grades miners and ensures that competition for tau remains fair and consistent. However, if you've been mining on the network, you're probably aware of the occasional deviation from perfect network validation. So Jacob, it sounds like you're speaking to creating a new validation method to bring us closer to the aligned state of a more perfect network.
I wouldn't describe it as a completely new validation method. We're just tweaking NUMA consensus. One of the really cool things about the validation system that we built is that we can change the thing that we are evaluating from token logits to embeddings, and that's something that we can build right into Bittensor, and it allows us to have these multi-networks that work on different modalities. So the change to the validation system that I'm talking about right now is that we're going to move back, and I would say we're not going forward, we're kind of falling backwards to what it originally was. And that's around the mixtures of extras model, which is a type of machine learning model that allows, it's ahead of a machine learning model that selects the experts that it needs in order to work on a particular domain of the problem. And this was the original design for Bittensor, allowing people, well, specifically machines, to query into a network of computers, and learn which ones to speak to at any moment in time. Mac?
Wonderful. Going off of that, a lot of the community has been asking about the true functionality and intention of the network. Mixture of experts has been discussed, but I don't think many of us truly know what that means and what that is. How does the Bittensor method of developing artificial intelligence differentiate from the traditional industry?
I think that the core difference is that we're using incentivization to create the salient quality that we want. So the network is built up of models that produce representations, and that's this fundamental unit used by a lot of machine learning systems. And I don't think that differentiates us that much. If you look at Cohere, if you look at OpenAI, they're built on embedding systems. If you look at a project, an open source project like LangChain, for instance, LangChain is a set of agents that are connected together, and those agents use embeddings, or they use token predictions from machine learning models. So we're situated right inside of the AI industry in terms of the product that we're creating. But the difference is just the nature of the machine that makes it. We use incentivization instead of being a bureaucratic organization that hires engineers. Yeah, Ala, do you want to speak to that?
No, Const, I was just going to say, maybe we should do a quick explain like on 5 on what embeddings are versus token predictions. It might be very helpful to the context of what we're building is.
Yeah, you think so?
Just like a quick 2-minute explanation. For example, embeddings you can think of as literally a numeric representation of words. So if I give you a word, you can literally turn it into a vector, and that's an embedding. That's really pretty much it. Whereas it comes out to token predictions is when we're actually predicting the next word coming in out of a model.
Yeah.
Just wanted to give that context.
Yeah, like one of the things that we're working on right now is a new form of chatbot, like a ChatGPT that's integrated with inside Bittensor. And the question would be, how is that integrated? How does this agent connect with other agents within inside of Bittensor? And the answer is that it does so by speaking in the embedding world and the embedding landscape. Or you could say the embedding modality. So if this chatbot wants to pick up information that's relevant today, and the context window for this chatbot is that it's thinking about the latest Avatar film. The context is represented by an embedding. So it is understanding that information via an embedding of text, and it's seeking information about that movie. How would it actually access that information? So it could query a document. Is it going to put the entire document into the context window, or is it going to use an embedding of the context window of that text that it's reading? And then the answer is that it uses an embedding most of the time. So the reason we built Bittensor off embeddings is because it's this fundamental unit that can be used by other applications. It needs to get information about Avatar. It can query the network and return a whole bunch of embeddings that potentially contain information relevant for solving that particular task.
Why is the mixture of experts approach so attractive for Bittensor?
The reason it's attractive is that mixtures models are fundamentally about selecting a set of experts and picking the ones that are valuable to the model at any particular time. That selection process is the learning process that the validators go through to determine who in the network is producing value. It's a market for the experts. So Bittensor reverse engineers that system and says, okay, well, let's build a market around this informational production that comes from the miners, and then introduce an incentive mechanism through the token. So that's why it's so relevant to us, is because this design is inherently decentralized, and because it speaks the language of value.
Wonderful. So going back to our validation, we have a new feature being released alongside Finny, delegation. How does delegation come into play, and why was it chosen to help stabilize consensus?
It wasn't primarily chosen to stabilize consensus inside Bittensor, but that's one of the implications of the design, you might say. So it's a non-custodial delegated stake system that was built to allow users that don't want to run validators the ability to get a return on their crypto on Tau in the same way that large miners can. And that was the primary impetus of building the delegated staking the way it was built. As it relates to consensus, it's quite interesting, because by its nature we've limited the number of validators that we can have, and this is not to enforce a unfair competition into the system so that only certain people can validate. That's not why it's there. It's actually a computational complexity reason. It's because we can't sustain that many validators on the chain. It just becomes too difficult to run the epoch step, and it produces too much data. So it's like a blockchain limitation. The reason why there's going to be this hard cap on the number of validators. But one of the things that is implied by this hard cap is that there'll be a competition for those top slots, and that means that there'll be competition for validators to attract delegated stake, and the way that competition will be carried out, likely, is that people will look for the validators that are performing the best within the system. So the amount of Tau rewards that they're likely to attain for 1 Tau staked, whatever that ratio is, people will be looking at that as a way of maximizing their return. So if a validator is not performing well, its dividends per unit Tau will decrease substantially, and people will look into other methods of doing validation. And look to different validators. So that means that validators will need to be very competitive, very online, and very accurate in their validation process to maximize those returns. And we want this to mean that people will run validators that are, have 100% uptime, and that are learning really fast. The faster that they're learning, the more accurate the system is at selecting winners and obviously punishing losers. And that's something we want, because it improves it defuzzifies the incentive mechanism for people that are participating in the network.
So essentially what you're saying is validators will be competing for delegated stake, and the idea is that this helps incentivize validators to drive towards a more honest and robust network.
Yeah, exactly. It drives them to be very, very performant validators. And we want that to be the case, because if the consensus is not strict, if the consensus is not strong, then the system loses resolution in its incentive. So, another thing is that as we launch more networks, it's going to become increasingly difficult to run competitive validators. And we really want there to be incentive for validators to run across every network. So they'll have to run a validator for image network. They'll have to run a validator for the registration network. They'll have to run a validator for Nakamoto clone A and clone B. You can see how this, linear increase in complexity for the validators is going to be expensive. and we need there to be competition to force those validators to really take it seriously. As a few people in the community know, it does take it really is a full-time job to keep the validators going strong, and if they go down, it can cost a lot of people a lot of money. So it's important that we increase concentration of competition at that level in the system.
Can we expect an increase in minimum compute requirements for our validators? Are we going to be shifting to bigger machines with GPUs?
Yes, absolutely. And it depends on the validator specifically, but the way that we're building them now is that, yes, it's going to be much more computationally expensive in terms of memory, in terms of bandwidth on the internet. Yeah.
So another point I wanted to touch on is registration. As many of us are aware, registration difficulty has skyrocketed over the past couple months, with difficulty hitting an all-time high of 1.3 quadrillion. The barrier to entering the network as a miner is becoming increasingly computationally expensive. Are you thinking of any new approaches to lower the level of registration difficulty, and will subnetwork play any role in this?
Yeah, basically the solution to this is to use multi-layered networks, and perhaps some people have already tried this out on the Finney test network. With things like network connections, what we can make it, we can basically exponentiate the number of slots where people are competing with by having these multiple networks at different layers. So there's like leagues to Bittensor, and so people will be solving difficulty at the lowest level and then moving their way up the levels. It's really a supply and demand problem. There's only 496 slots, and there's a huge demand for people to get into that network because the returns are quite high. So the solution is to really increase the number of slots that people are competing for. And if we double that number, then we can expect that the difficulty will drop in half, just as a raw relationship between supply and demand. That's our solution. Now, that's, I think, a bit of a rough solution, in the sense that really what we want to do is make it so that the people that are solving this proof of work are doing so only because they think that they can compete within the system better than others. And unfortunately, there's a fair amount of randomness in the incentive mechanism as it's implemented. And that makes it so that it's really like a trial and error system. So it's about throwing as much at the wall as you can, and if something sticks, you make money. As we tweak and optimize the validation process, the rewards for just throwing bad miners on the network will decrease, and that will mean there's less competition. But honestly, our biggest hope here is just to increase the number of slots in the meantime, as we become better at solving the validation process.
Wonderful. So it sounds like we will have a base network or a series of networks in a league system to mitigate the increasingly growing registration difficulty.
To spread it out.
Yep.
As there are more networks, though, that same amount of compute will be thrown against more doors. Yeah.
Wonderful. So in addition to these layered networks to spread out the registration difficulty, I've heard you've mentioned already that we are looking at an embeddings network, an image subnetwork, an audio subnetwork. Will the creation of chain network upgrades and subnetwork creation continue to be decided by the foundation alone, or is a new form of governance going to take place in the future?
I think we have to think about our system like we're moving through the stages of government. Right now, it's effectively a totalitarian, hopefully people think slightly benevolent dictatorship on the part of the core team, especially when it comes to making these changes with the networks, expanding them, choosing their hyperparameters. To a certain degree, we need to learn how to navigate this ship very well before we can build the documentation for others to do it in a more distributed sense. As is, we have no plans of allowing individuals to create their own subnetworks just yet. It's likely that we will get requests for that, and we will listen really carefully to what people want, so that we can initiate these changes on the chain that the community need and want in terms of subnetworks. 2023 will be about us moving to Finney and getting the machine learning aspect of this network running. As the network matures, as the community matures, as we mature, then the DAO will come into play and be able to make these decisions. But in order for that to happen, we, like I said before, we need to become much more familiar with the you could say levers of this project. But this will be something that we implement. Right now, the way in which the tokens are distributed is fundamentally based on tau, and so that power is the hammer through which people choose how this network and this project mature. The market is where that occurs. So there are levers of control for people that own tau, but it's not going to be for another year before the DAO is something that we implement and release into the community.
Earlier, you mentioned a chat assistant model. Can you speak any more to that?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of really interesting work around chats. Chat agents are like the pinnacle of AI in that they're where the rubber hits the road and where the community and the greater population of people in this world can communicate with AI and have a visceral experience of talking to something intelligent. OpenAI launched that project because they had built their ChatGPT. They built their GPT model, which was the foundation model they built their chat off. We're building foundation models as a company. That's our main drive. It's this general type of intelligence that is built off of ubiquitous and cheap data that we can get all over the internet. That's what feeds Bittensor, its ability to learn. So we're still at this level of integrating and expanding our core business proposition, which is foundation models. At the same time, we have teams at OpenTensor that are working on using the state-of-the-art techniques in conjunction with what we're building. So, Chat Tensor that we're going to release, likely a beta. Well, we are going to release a beta in the next week for use. It's not integrated into Bittensor, but it's something that we're building into Bittensor. We're going to build into Bittensor over the next quarter or so. And it's really exciting because we'll be able to speak to how intelligent Bittensor is when this chat is really integrated into what we're building. So that's really exciting. Anyway, so the announcement there is that we have a private beta. We're gonna post that into the chat after this call, and people that are in a Discord can sign up and have access to what Bittensor's been producing behind the scenes.
Just a quick correction, Const. The wait list comes out today. So you can feel free to put yourself on the wait list, and then you'll receive a private invite later on.
Yeah.
Exciting, very exciting. So the network is growing rapidly. Are there any plans to increase sequence length anytime soon?
Not on the near horizon. Long term, yes. One of the things about us moving to or splitting between an embedding network and a token network will be that we can increase the sequence length in one and not the other. In the embedding dimension, we probably want to maybe even decrease the sequence length and work with much larger embedding sizes at a smaller sequence length. In the sequence to sequence network that we're going to have probably at launch, at launch for sure, We'll be able to increase the sequence length. We'll be able to do streaming sequence length. But that technique of working with longer sequences will likely come into play with streaming, which we don't have right now. So there'll be a context window that expands with more calls. So these are things that we're working on, but they're not going to be released unless we know that the miner community can actually service that type of request. And so we've hired a team to build faster miners for us, and that means like using techniques like deep speed and accelerate, Triton inference servers, things that allow miners to run across multiple GPUs. None of the sequence length updates that people are often afraid of will occur without us being sure that people can actually suffice to answer those requests.
And Const, back to delegation, are we going to see any lockup periods? Is the foundation going to play a role in showing an official list of validators, or is that going to be left more up to the community?
So far, we've seen the community do a really good job. Tau Stats is already putting out a validator pool listing, and that's great. We'd love to see that kind of advancement from the community. As for lockups, we're not really believers in lockups. We think that it creates an artificial reduction in cell pressure. The only lockup that we'll likely have is one that reduces the or that protects against attacks from unstaking and destaking periodically. So just reducing the likelihood of people to spam the network. We're not intending to force people to lock their Tau. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Is the foundation hiring?
Hell yeah, we are. We're expanding. Yeah, we're expanding like crazy right now, and we're looking for people that have experience with Python and back end, full stack, front end, machine learning engineers. Come work with us. We're having an amazing time over here. We're working on some really interesting stuff. So, yeah, if you know anyone, let us know.
We're also looking for some product folks. Anybody with a product background, please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Const or to Steffi. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, guys. I think unless anyone has any questions in the chat, that should bring us close to an end.
Cool, should be good. Some folks are asking about the waitlist. If anybody wondering about the waitlist, we will be posting the link right after this call.
Yeah, there's some questions in the chat. I can answer them, Mac, and then we can end the call.
Okay.
So re-timeline for the chatbot. There's the private beta that you can enter right now. So that's the first step on that timeline. Can we leave questions here to answer by the hosts? Yes, you can. When will we be able to look at the Tau transactions on a block explorer? Yeah, we have a developer building that right now using a squid, so that's fantastic. That's coming out soon. Can you describe how Bittensor Chat would work from a user perspective? Right now, we're building a front end, so it would work exactly like Chat GPT. 2, besides inflation, how does the network get compensated for queries? It's not compensated for queries. It's cost to have bandwidth, which is similar. So the demand for Tau comes from people that want to have access. 3, what metrics should we be watching to determine use and growth? I think that in the last year, we really watched registration difficulty, but now that's something we really want to decrease. The applications that we build on top are some of the growths that we want to see. We want to actually see people doing research on top of Bittensor, and it's one of the things that we're going to push with delegated staking. We want research teams to apply, and we're going to delegate stake to them for doing work on top of Bittensor. So that's 2023 for us in terms of growth. Yeah, I would say seeing projects come out as validator heads, that's for me, that's the thing that would matter the most. Mac, is that it?
That's it.
Fantastic. Well done.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
Yes, thanks for coming, everyone.
Cool. Thanks all.